The Portuguese built this castle around 1482 under the captainship of Don Diego de Azambuja. The Portuguese were the first Europeans to arrive on this land. That was 1471. 11 years after, they put up this structure, and they came here purposely to trade and spread Christianity. They introduced a system of trade known as barter, where they exchange goods for goods. They came along with European goods such as gunpowder, mirror, tobacco, cheap fabrics, bracelets, sugar, the exchange of gold and ivory. They were much interested in the gold, so the rate at which the locals were giving them gold gave them the impression that the land was full of gold. So they named this place Amina or Damina, which means the mine. They had another name we refer to as Aldea, which means village in their language. But then because the locals couldn't pronounce the Portuguese words, Amina or Damina was corrupted to today Elmina. And Aldea was also corrupted to today Edina. So Elmina and Edina are all wrongly Portuguese words. And that doesn't mean the locals had no name. Before the arrival of the Portuguese, the original name of this community was called Anum Ansa. And Anum Ansa literally means inexhaustible kind of water. Water that you drink, it never gets finished. Insua Onoma Ensa. Now, the zeal for more gold motivated the Portuguese to negotiate with the then king, Nana Kwamena Ansa I, for this portion of land to build a fort, whereby they can protect their trade and their traders, and also have rooms for their missionaries. But then initially the king refused. As a traditional ruler, he said cultural differences was going to be a problem, and he went further by saying friends will be better friends when they don't live together or they don't see each other often. But then upon further persuasion and assurances, the Portuguese were able to convince the king. So this portion of land was issued to them. And in history, there were many people, so you understand. And in history, that would be the first time a local king issuing a plot of land to the Europeans, and for that matter, the Portuguese. So they put up this structure, but then it wasn't big as we are seeing today. They started with their gold trading, but then along the line, something happened. In the early 16th centuries, that's the 1500s, the Portuguese attention shifted from gold trade to human trade. And it all started when the Spaniards got to the New World. Upon careful examination, they realized the land was fertile for cultivation. Sugar, tobacco, cotton were cultivated. Initially, they were using the Native Americans, that's the Red Indians or the Amerindians, to work on their plantation. But then, because of their climatic conditions and physically, they were not strong. And the outbreak of European diseases such as smallpox, diarrhea, it was decimating the local population. So they needed alternative. Many suggested they go in for blacks. There was this Catholic priest named Bartolomeo de las Casas. He suggested to the Spanish they go in for Africans, because Africans were working under similar climatic conditions, and they are much stronger than the Native Americans, so there will be a better alternative. Now, to prove him right or wrong, 1512, 1515 thereabout, few Africans were taken from Spain to Hispaniola, today Haiti, formerly known as Dominican Republic. They tested them on their plantation, and through to De las Casas, they proved physically strong. They realized Africans were good candidates for their plantation work. From there, the demand for human trade began. Now that's the unfortunate story behind slave trade. But then, slavery itself has been with humans from time immemorial. Now, before the coming of the Europeans, we had the system of slavery which existed. We had tribes, kingdoms, empires, and each of them were fighting, not for any other reason, but then to expand their territories. Now, at some point in time, some people could fight over a portion of land, claiming ownership. We were fighting with bows and arrows, but then these Europeans introduced gun and gunpowder. Now, initially, if a tribe is able to defeat another tribe, The losers of the war were brought into the lands of the other. They were not put in chains, neither were they put in dungeons. They were fed, they were clothed, and it was very difficult identifying such a person from a free man. Why? Because he or she could marry, raise free kids, pay the price on his head to be a free person. But the situation changed when the Europeans came. Now, our first Prime Minister, Osajifo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, he made a statement. He said, and I quote, "Division is the weapon for the oppressor. Now, when we are divided, we are weak. But when we are together, there is strength." Because we were already divided, the Europeans capitalized on that to enslave us. Now, in the olden days, wrongdoers were sold into slavery. Debtors were also brought in as captives. Now, after this intertribal wars, if tribe A is able to defeat tribe B, they were captured, brought into slavery. Some were forcefully kidnapped. At some point in time, a whole community, a whole family could be raided, brought into slavery. And these enslaved Africans were captured all over West African coast. Nigeria, Benin, Senegal, Mali, Togo, Burkina Faso, Cameroon, just to mention a few. Now, when they are captured, they were made to walk barefooted. From wherever they were captured, they walked through bushes, climbed mountains, crossed rivers. Along the line, most of them died. Some sustained injuries. Those who were found weak were left behind, which means they were left in the hands of wild animals. Upon arrival, they had a stopover at a village called Asin Manson, about 62 kilometers drive from here. It was a slave market, one of the busiest slave markets. There is a river there called Asin Manson Slave River, where these enslaved Africans were allowed to take their last African bath. They gave them food. Those who were old enough had their heads shaved with broken bottles. They applied shea butter or palm oil on their skins to look fresh and attractive. So in here they would attract higher prices. From there, they matched them down here. In here, they were separated according to their strength. The weak ones were termed as domestic captives, and the strong ones were termed as commercial captives. Now, the domestic captives were those working inside the structure, and the commercial ones were those who were taken to the Americans and the Caribbeans to work on their plantation. From there, they were put to their respective dungeons. Now, the Portuguese spent 155 years in here. 1637, the Dutch came in. It wasn't a smooth transition. They fought, and the Dutch took over. Now, when they came in, they extended the walls of the castle, took in more captives, and they spent 235 years. 1807 was when the British Parliament passed the first law to abolish this evil trade. 1814, the Dutch also did the same. 1865, the US also did the same. But then down here, the actual thing never stopped. So what we called illegal trading began until this whole trade became non-profitable. So around 1872, the Dutch sold this structure to the English. The British came in here, spent 85 years. But then they didn't use this structure as a slave castle. It was used solely for administrative purposes. And after the Second World War, which occurred on 1939 and ended 1945, 3 years after the war, that's 1948, this same structure was used as a police training school. And I'm not saying this because the British didn't partake in the slave trade. They did, but they rather used Cape Coast Castle. Ghanaians took over when we had independence on the 6th of March, 1957. And we are 68 years now. So today, St. George's Castle happens to be the oldest, the largest European edifice in sub-Saharan Africa in terms of transatlantic slave trade. It is 543 years old. And basically, we have 3 castles in Ghana. We have one at the national capital, Accra, built by the Danes, 1661. And that's Christian or the Osu Castle. We have one at the regional capital, Cape Coast, built by the British, 1665. And this one by the Portuguese, 1482. Now, among the 3, Cape Coast Castle happens to be the smallest, the youngest among the 3, built purposely for slave trade. It was during the peak of slavery when the castle was erected. Now, slavery itself lasted over 400 years. So we can't take a day or 2 to know everything. Talk more of using these few minutes. But then, because of our time, we'll make it brief. So this is just a brief overview.
Thank you. Interesting.
Well done.